Good afternoon to our chair and vice chair. It's great to have you on. It is 3 p.m. sharp for those who are watching on our live stream. We're just going to give it a few more minutes for many more members to get joined in as the Monday comes to an end today. For those just joining the Zoom or watching or listening on YouTube, this is Barrick Abramson. It is 3:02 Monday afternoon for the 1296 Task Force. We are going to give this just a few more minutes to get some more of our members online. I appreciate everyone's patience. This is Barrick. Carrie has just reached out to the committee members with an email. We're texting a few. Hopefully, we get some folks on board. I know Ms. Moran is going to be late due to a board finance meeting, and Jennifer Harpole let us know that she has a conflict. We are expecting some other members of the exec committee. So we're just going to try to see if we can raise them and get them online, and we'll get started just as soon as we can. I'm going to give us now 2 more minutes just as if we get a few more folks on. I see Kirsten is on, the Lieutenant Governor and Rep Ortiz. We know Elizabeth Moran is going to be 30 minutes late. Jennifer Harpole had a conflict. For those who aren't aware, we have another member, Julie Reskin, who's out on sabbatical, and Senate President has appointed her replacement. who I'm excited to have join us. But her replacement, Hillary, had a conflict on today's first meeting. So we'll give it another minute or two. We may have a shortened and intimate conversation, or maybe our chair and vice chair are going to take us in a direction to just do some decision making today. But my focus when folks get on will be to update everybody on where the subcommittees are with their work. It is 3:05. At 3:07, I'm going to start the conversation with whomever is online. So look forward to talking with everybody here in just a couple minutes. Mr. Stone, good to have you on the call. I'll tell you what, it is 3:07. And although we do not have a quorum, the good news is we are not voting on things today. So I'm going to go ahead and start the conversation. For those of you listening or watching the stream elsewhere, we're going to go through some administrative items real quick up front. This is Barrick Abramson with Confluence PSG, and this is the November 4th meeting of the 1296 Task Force, the Executive Committee, the Task Force for the Rights of Coloradans with Disabilities. We've got just a few norms we ask people to observe. If you are a member of the Executive Committee and you're in a place where it is safe and comfortable to do so, we'd love to have you on camera. Members of the public, we would ask that you leave your cameras off until public comment, at which time we'd ask you to send either myself, Barrick Abramson, or Carrie Steele a message in the chat that you'd like to speak during public comment, which will be towards the end of today's meeting. Fair warning, today's meeting, given attendance, may be on the shorter side. And I would just ask on that note of chat that be the only time folks use chat. The chat can be particularly distracting for those using a screen reader. And frankly, it becomes distracting for any of the conversations. Other than that, we're looking forward to today's conversation. I'll give a brief overview of what we plan to cover today, and then ask our chair and vice chair to offer any opening thoughts. We are not yet at the point where we are voting, so I'm not too concerned about the quorum numbers, although I certainly hope that our executive committee members, if you're watching or listening to this later, that you have time to go through all of the stakeholder input and the latest notes from each of the subcommittees. Our intention today is to start with executive committee reactions to some of the stakeholder input that we've received. We'll share then what the subcommittees are doing and how they're approaching it, including where they are in their decision-making process. All of the subcommittees have now met to talk through the stakeholder feedback and begun voting on recommendations. Some have voted cleanly on more of them than others, while some are asking to combine or revise some others. The final thing I want to do today with the executive committee is talk a little bit about how we're going to approach the work starting once this executive committee receives the recommendations from each of the subcommittees, which will be the 1st of December. We want to talk through a bit about the conversations the executive committee will have, how you want to approach deciding on the recommendations or continue that conversation from last month. And we want to talk a little bit more about having some listening sessions and get your guidance on all of that. With that, I'm going to invite the Lieutenant Governor and then Representative Ortiz to offer any opening thoughts that you'd like to.
Well, good afternoon. And even though we aren't voting today, I hope there's a lot of other people that are. So happy Election Day Eve. I want to thank everybody for joining us today as we enter the home stretch on the task force's work. As Barrick mentioned, the subcommittees are hard at work this month finalizing the recommendations. The broad feedback they received, I know, has been shaping the final language. The subcommittees have been very aspirational in their recommendations, which we encourage them to do. And as the executive committee will likely need to be more conscious of feasible timelines and budget constraints, that doesn't mean we shouldn't recommend options that have significant impacts, just that recommendations that have unrealistic timelines or costs cannot be absorbed in a tight fiscal environment. So they could be shelved when a variation of those recommendations might have been possible and created some incremental change. I also know that state agencies provided feedback to the subcommittees, which I thank them for. And I think it's important that we consider this feedback as we develop our recommendations to ensure that we're accounting for implementation. I also want to thank Barrick and Carrie for their intentional approach all along to this work. It's critical that our final report clearly states that the challenges that the subcommittees have addressed and the desired end state. This will help ensure that specific recommendations have the necessary flexibility and can be tailored to meet changing situations. So I just want to remind people, and I know Barrett probably will too, that our final recommendation report is due on January 30th, 2025. To achieve this, we need to finalize our recommendation by early January so Barrick and Carrie can get the report drafted, edited, and made accessible in time to submit it. So that means we'll be spending some of our holiday season together, and it'll be extra busy this year. I know scheduling will be a challenge, but I hope every task force member is able to prioritize these meetings because we're at the end of our really important work. So I'll turn it back to Barrick, who I assume will turn it to Rep. Ortiz.
Thank you very much, Lieutenant Governor. Rep. Ortiz, to you.
Don't have any written prepared remarks. Just want to speak a little bit to my initial impression on the feedbacks, which is, to be real frank, it's more of the same. It is, we already do this, or this is going to be too expensive, or this is going to be hard. So just to be quite frank, especially coming from some of the agencies, not very impressed. I mean, I want to quote something here specifically from Colorado Competitive Council, where they say outdoor recreational proposal, safety must be the first and foremost consideration of this subcommittee. I don't know how many times I have to say this. Basic access is safety. Basic access is safety. Basic access is safety. It should be no different than fire code. It should be no different than building code. The fact that we don't have basic access endangers those of us that live with a disability. So just to be real, again, to be quite frank, not very impressed with some of the feedback that I've been getting. I mean, the subcommittees have been doing amazing in trying to make the most out of the feedback. I got to cite Councilmember Hines when we were talking about voting and how some of the feedback from the Secretary of State's office was, well, we don't have certain rulemaking or control over unincorporated municipalities, you know, special districts, et cetera. And he came back with civil rights are not a matter and not an object of local control. It's 100% right. So I hope everybody that's listening in, for those of you that live with a disability that are going to be involved for the long haul here, that you understand that this feedback only proves that it's going to be more of a fight no matter what we recommend. As far as like feasible timelines go, I got to push back. I'm not here to give departments the warm and fuzzy. I'm not here to give able-bodied folks that don't live with a physical disability the warm and fuzzy. That's not what I'm here for. I'm here to challenge you, and I'm here to challenge all of us to be and do better. This idea that, you know, these timelines are not feasible, they've had 34 years, folks. On the newer stuff, I'm willing to be a little bit more giving. But as far as enforcing what has already existed for 34 years, I'm going to be a little bit less forgiving. And I'm not trying to make excuses for departments that should have been securing basic access this whole time that have not. This is more of the same that I experienced at the state capitol. And to be quite frank, when you live with a disability and have to prove that you have a right to exist in an equitable way as everyone else, it gets exhausting, which is why I am justly and rightfully have earned some time to take a knee and away from politics, because I'm tired of having to justify my right to exist as a human being just in the same way as everyone else. So, you know, really proud of the subcommittees that they are making the most out of some of the feedback that they've been given. I'm going to speak for myself that I'm not very impressed, especially coming from some of the departments. So I don't know if they didn't understand it or if they didn't spend that much time on it. But, you know, I just hope that everyone's in it for the long haul and that we can do the most we can with what we're given.
Thank you, Representative Ortiz. And we're going to get a lot more into your reaction and others and talking about that stakeholder feedback Let me pull up for just a minute and talk about how these reports are going to come to all of you and what is happening. Each of these subcommittees met last week. They started working through with the intention of getting through half-ish of their ideas. I would say that they got between, each of them on average got between a third and a halfway through. And I'll talk in a few minutes about each subcommittee and the direction they're going. What you will all receive, just as a reminder, on December 2nd, which is the first business day of December, you will receive a report from each subcommittee. In that report will be, for each idea or recommendation, they will name the problem they are trying to solve. They will name the end state they are trying to create. And they will name a pathway to get there that in some cases will be a single action of change this or that. In some cases, it will be a multi-step path forward. Sometimes it will take a year. Sometimes, as Rep. Ortiz suggested, if it's something new, it may take a bit longer, but they will name the minimum first steps they believe need to be taken. This executive committee will then receive those recommendations. We will have an initial conversation about them. One of the things we'll talk about in the back half of today's call is how to get more public input. Carrie and I had a conversation with some folks from the state just an hour ago about putting together another conversation potentially, or an opportunity for you all to get direct input and answers to your questions from the state agencies, and potentially some direct questions once you've gotten the recommendations from the subcommittees. So you'll receive those reports, and I'm not going to go down the rabbit hole again. We talked last month of how we're going to work our way through it. The only thing that I'll add is that today, as I said, we're going to talk about how you want to make sure we have opportunity to get public input. And that public input, I want to underscore, will be the other thing in the reports you all receive. You will receive, as part of those reports in the appendices, every bit of written commentary that was submitted. You'll receive a list of who spoke to the subcommittees at any time over the last year, and who we reached out to and had the opportunity to provide input and comment, and either did or did not. So there will be full transparency into who commented, what the comments were, what the votes were, and who chose not to speak at this time. With that, what I'd like to do is pick up where Representative Ortiz was. And before we go into the specific subcommittees and specific ideas, I want to talk a little bit at the high level of some of the key takeaways from the stakeholder input. And I'll share my takeaways, the key themes I saw. I'm going to ask each subcommittee member, or excuse me, each executive committee member to share their takeaways as well. I know you've all had access to that. Carrie sent that around. When I looked at it, I'll share what I saw and what I didn't see. What I did not see much of was new solutions to the problems that we are working on. I didn't see a lot of, I like your idea or I disagree with your idea, but here is a better way forward. I didn't see, I disagree with this and here's the solution I'm offering. I didn't see your idea is good but not great, so here's how to improve it, with a few exceptions. We did have a few people that offered, I think you could bring these voices into this. So unfortunately, we didn't get a lot of new thinking on top of what the subcommittees have been discussing and working on for the last 9 or 10 months. In general, what I saw was people who in very short answers said, I support this. This is exactly what is needed. As a person with a disability, if this happened, this would help me in this way. Or people saying it's long past due that something like that take place. On the opposition side, I saw a couple of things. I saw first people saying that's an overreach for the state to do so, or a lot of questions or feedback of that would be an expensive proposition, either in terms of FTEs state or local government would need to hire, or that it would create an uncertain business environment and was too great a risk, particularly when it came to CADA. But I didn't see in those specifics of how to get at solving the problem in different ways, just a lot of pushback of don't require that. That said, that did lead to some really productive conversations, I think, with most of the subcommittees. And we'll talk through each of those ideas. But those were the big themes I saw, was that's expensive, that's not the role of the state, or I support this and this is what's needed. And I share those themes not to be comprehensive in every comment, but to give you a sense of my takeaways. And frankly, to say, I don't think the stakeholder input did the job of answering for our subcommittees. Is this the best idea or not? Because it was very split feedback of this will help me or I worry about the risks of this. So the burden of deciding what meets the charge giving to us in House Bill 1296 of identifying barriers or challenges and recommending solutions to provide that basic access and to improve access falls on the subcommittees who are now working through those ideas and will ultimately fall to all of you when you get those ideas. What I'd like to do before I go into each of the individual subcommittees is go around to the executive committee members, and I'll give a little warning. Michael, I'm going to go to you first, and then to Kirsten, then Lieutenant Governor, and then Representative Ortiz. And I'd love just, Michael, your thoughts on kind of what you took away when you read or heard some of the stakeholder input.
Thank you, Barrick. Michael Stone speaking. It was fairly consistent with what Rep Ortiz had to say when I read it. I was very discouraged, especially when I saw the repetitiveness, literally, that some of the people sort of, for lack of a better word, would cut and paste. In other words, for every question that was asked, they just gave the same answer, that we were creating problems or looking for problems that don't exist, to that effect. The sad part about that is that it doesn't give us much credence in that input, if that's the way that we're going to receive that. On the other hand, it's always interesting to hear people say that they're very much in support of something, and everything that follows kind of negated the previous statement. So I continue to process everything that's coming in, some a little bit better than others. Something that read very loudly with me was one of our subcommittee members in the outdoor subcommittee said something extremely profound. I think she nervously asked a question that she thought was very naive. And this is a parent who has a severely disabled child. And the question was, because it kept coming down to it, and the pattern of enforcement. And when this subcommittee member flat out asked, she said, well, who enforces the ADA? Who enforces it nationally? Who enforces it locally in the state of Colorado? And what was interesting was how long it took to get an answer. And quite honestly, we never really did answer her question, and for very good reason. And I really do feel it's something that needs to be addressed, and perhaps it's something that we can talk about today, because I would like to hear those thoughts, because that therein lies this huge problem. And yes, it's a 34-year-old law that has not been enforced with anything outside of lawsuits. There's nothing automatic. There's no place to actually call if you're heavily discriminated against. You have to go and take matters into your hands, and quite honestly, most people can't. And that was what was disappointing by one of the responses that we saw repetitively with public input was specific to that. Was, well, we don't think that's a good idea. You shouldn't necessarily have those rights for caps. There shouldn't. We should find alternative ways to resolve these things. And it's, well, except for the fact that that's what we've been living for 34 years, and we don't have those resolutions. There isn't a place to go. There isn't something that is that is accessible for those resolutions. And so it was very disappointing to hear to see that kind of pushback, especially as it relates to the rewrite. But I think it was very consistent with the other, both in housing and outdoors as well. I'd rather hear Rep. Ortiz's takeaway on government and so forth. So I hope that is something. The other one that was disappointing is, I'm going to go back to my me as a businessman, is the concept of negotiating with ourselves. Well, we don't like what you put out there, so give us something else. And I think this is a little bit consistent with no concrete solutions. Not like, okay, well, how about we look at it this way or try this? In other words, we're something practical and at least acknowledging that what was put out. I've said this publicly multiple times. I struggle with the word aspirational. I understand why that word is there and where it's coming from, but I really do struggle with that, because what exactly are we aspiring to? Civil rights? It doesn't necessarily make a heck of a lot of sense. But I didn't particularly appreciate this concept of being forced to have to go back to the drawing board and give us something else that works for us, as opposed to something that might have been more practical and concrete. Say, no, all right, we see where you're going with this, but let's try this. And so hopefully that's helpful to at least get the ball rolling, Barry.
No, thank you very much, Michael. And I'm going to go to Kirsten next. I think Michael hit on it was an interesting moment in that conversation about who enforces. And I think there was a bit of an aha moment for that group in realizing that although there exist ADA officers in local governments and in state government, ultimately what they took away from that discussion was enforcement relies on the victimized pursuing and fighting for their rights rather than someone proactively ensuring those rights, which I think gets back to the reason we're all here, because we find ourselves in a place where individuals who have all the same constitutional rights are having to fight to have their basic rights rather than having them ensured. Kirsten, are you with us and able to join the conversation?
Yeah, I'm here. I'm not sure I have a lot to add to the conversation. I did read all the comments and I'm listening to everyone's feedback. I think I've struggled personally. It should come as no surprise to anyone. I think I know why I'm on this board, is to try and represent one of the sides of business and the realities of implementing some of these recommendations. Candidly, I've struggled with some of the recommendations that have come out of the subcommittees, especially as an attorney. I think it does have me question how, from a business standpoint, you would be able to address and deal with some of these issues. But I don't know that I have a great answer. I don't have enough of a background here to offer great solutions that would be the alternatives that I hear and understand why it is that you guys and what everyone's comments before would be. But I think I really do struggle personally with some of the recommendations out of these committees and how it is that they can be implemented in a manner. When you look at all of the other regulations, I think the part that's hard is, I'm used to all of the other things. It's not just implementing these additional requirements and restrictions that we also need. We now also have higher affordable percentage requirements that you have to do in projects and all sorts of other mandates. So I guess I'm struggling because I understand the comments and why people said them the way that they did, and I don't have a great solution, and that I'm also struggling with, because I would like to find one to offer here, and I need to think a little further to be able to provide that to this conversation.
Kirsten, I appreciate the honesty, and this is where I am going to lean pretty heavily on and into this group in December as we get the final recommendations from the subcommittees to really ask all of you two things. One, who, once we receive those, we want to get input and ideas and feedback from, and in what format we want to do that additional input. I'm also going to ask all of you to be comfortable, to be candid, and to be respectful of one another to have those conversations. Because it's interesting, I just told another task force we're working with, I need you to feel comfortable disagreeing with one another. If where we land is all of you agreeing, somebody is not being honest with themselves. That's just what I know about the composition of this group. So I want everyone to be comfortable being the lone voice, saying, I disagree. What I will ask is two things. Those that are in the majority to listen with intentionality to what those other voices are saying and assume the best intentions. And if you are the one disagreeing, I'm going to ask you to, number one, explain why, and number two, rather than just disagree, offer another path forward. And I can't guarantee that you being in the minority will persuade everyone of your alternative path, but I can assure you, you will be heard respectfully, and our work will be stronger because you offered additional ideas. So, Kirsten, I'm not just saying this to you, I'm saying it to everybody. I'm looking forward to, in December, everybody having some really tough conversation, and I'm going to need everyone to be an active part of doing your best to understand the perspectives of your colleagues and of those who have provided input, but to do so in a way that is productive rather than just dismissive of ideas that are there. Lieutenant Governor, if I could bring you in, I would love your key takeaways on what you read, heard, and saw in the input from our state agencies, from our local governments, from individual stakeholders, and from some of our professional associations.
All right, well, first of all, I hate to lose Rep. Ortiz in the legislature. You know, he's been such a great voice, and I totally understand his anger. You know, overall, I had really hoped for more feedback, actually, and more constructive feedback, I think, is still needed. You know, I think we've been good. We've done a lot of outreach. We've given people the opportunity to provide feedback. And I just, I'm assuming, and I could be wrong, that finally people will come to the table during session when we have some of these bills up for discussion. And they probably should have given us their feedback, you know, all along. But, you know, in terms of state agency people and stuff like that, you know, things don't have the importance for them that it does to us. You know, it doesn't matter what happens to people with disabilities until it matters to you, you know, and to yourself if you become disabled. And so they don't have the same kind of passion, you know, unfortunately, about this issue as some of us on the committee do. So maybe for their feedback, they didn't give it as much of a look or as much time as it, you know, as it might have deserved. You know, I think the task force originally was set up to shine a light on the different problems that people with disabilities face in terms of access. And we were all given the charge to come up with solutions. So, you know, now the solutions are on the table for discussion, and, you know, whether or not we can or can't implement them in their current form, I think isn't the saying that we can't implement them isn't the right answer. When I was in customer service at Healthcare Policy and Financing, I went to some customer service training, and one of the things that will always stick with me is, you know, I want to say to them, well, then don't tell me what you can't do. Tell me what you can do. There's a problem on the table. Maybe this isn't the right solution. What is the solution? Or what part of the solution, you know, can we implement? And the governor has a quote that he's always saying, you know, if this was easy, it would have all been done already. You know, this is not easy for business, I think, sometimes. So I think we just need to keep, you know, working away at it and hope that maybe we'll still get some constructive criticism, you know, as we move along. But yeah, I'd really hoped for more feedback from more audiences.
I appreciate that, Lieutenant Governor. Representative Ortiz, I think you started us off with some of your takeaways, but I'll come back to you. with having heard from some of the rest of the group and with this focus on what you took away from what you read and heard in the stakeholder feedback.
I don't want to be redundant. I've already spoke to what my perspective was on the feedback that I received. I didn't find it too helpful. It's more of the same. To be quite frank, the ones, especially those that are repeating the same old talking points, not to be cynical, but you're going to hear it during session. And then the pushback is going to be, well, we gave you an opportunity to participate. Yeah, we did. We told you we didn't like it. And just to be real cynical, it's not about trying to secure our rights, because they're putting the ball in our court, and that's all they're going to continue to do. So I don't know what else to say. That's not going to make me sound like the word was already used to describe my frustration is anger, right? That was used to describe me. I don't have room in my heart for anger anymore. If y'all want to treat me like less than a person, even though I sacrificed for this country, that's on you. That's fine. If that's how you're going to approach this, if that's what you're going to do, that's fine. You say assume best intentions, Barrick, but I did until I saw that feedback. And it was very clear that they're not best intentions. They're not, it's more of the same. You want my respect and you want me to assume best intentions, then put some work into it. Give me some alternatives. Give me something. You can't just say, well, we don't like that. But there's no incentive for them to do anything other than that, unless we really band together as a community and push something forward that has a chance of passing that scares them. That's when they will come to the table, because that's always how it's been. So no, I don't have anything different to say or anything productive to say. And I just want to clarify that, to be characterized as angry, sure, if I offend certain non-disabled, I'm just going to say it because I have nothing to lose, non-disabled white sensibilities, if I'm going to come off as the angry brown disabled dude, and that makes you feel comfortable to characterize me as such, fine, do what you will. It's not from a place of anger. It's from a place of frustration and hurt that I sacrificed so much for this country, and I can't even get the benefit of hard work on their end. All I get is a no, or all I get is the same old talking points. So I got nothing to add.
I appreciate it. Let me just offer two quick thoughts, and then I'm going to talk more about the subcommittees. Representative Ortiz, this is not about me standing with or against you on any idea or position, but nobody will dismiss you that way in any meeting I'm involved with or in any public square that I ever stand in. Let me also just clarify, when I say assume best intentions, I'm not going to assume best or worst intentions from any stakeholder. I'm making that ask of the executive committee of one another. And I will hold everybody accountable for being intellectually honest in their sharing of ideas here. I do want to I'm not going to go through play by play on the subcommittees. Some of you have joined some or most of those. All of you in the 1296 subcommittee ideas folder, Carrie has put all of the input in both graphical and plain text format. You will also see in the plain text survey document in each of those folders, I am putting the comments where revisions are being made in real time as comments, so you can see those as well. I do want to give a little bit of an overview of how those subcommittees are progressing, and then we'll have a conversation more about how you want to get the kind of input that would be helpful to all of you. So I'm switching things up a bit, just listening to all of you. But walking through the subcommittees, here's where we are. The Rewrite Subcommittee worked their way through the ideas they had offered and the feedback received on emotional distress, on caps, on timelines for following, and on administrative remedies. They voted each of those ideas up or down after some discussion of some minor, very minor word changes. Those ideas all will be moving forward to you. In that case of those ideas, it's no secret for me to share, they voted up each of those ideas with one dissenting voice, but you will be getting recommendations to allow emotional distress damages, with no caps, the allowance of punitive damages, the standardizing of timelines, and the removal of the requirement to exhaust administrative remedies. I do need to flag that there were questions raised at times during that about the implication for some federal partnership and contract dollars for things like the administrative remedies issue. There were some questions raised about the difference in timelines. Those will all be flagged in the report to all of you as implications and considerations, as will the vote that took place on those. When it came to each of the other subcommittees, the discussions were a little more nuanced based on some of the feedback. Some of the feedback was rightfully naming that our ideas in some cases were a little vague. For example, one of the ideas suggested requiring that every campaign event be in an accessible location that was verified, not just claimed to be accessible. That was intended to only speak to sanctioned campaign events such as debates. Some of the feedback was, you can't require every candidate to have a coffee or a fundraiser in an accessible home or location. So in that case, that idea is being clarified that what they meant was individual or official events sanctioned by the local body holding the election. In other cases, we got some feedback from the Secretary of State saying we already did that in for example, providing resources. And the subcommittee members said, well, that's great that this Secretary of State does it. We want to require that it be done by every Secretary of State and by those holding local elections. So in that case, rather than voting cleanly up or down, they've asked Carrie and I to make some revisions, and they will be voting at the next one. Similarly, on things like housing, they talked about some things where their idea was to require certain inspections. And as they talked through, what they realized was they were looking for enforcement of what already exists. So you'll see when you look at the notes and when you get the final recommendations, they're asking for greater auditing of what is already required and for enforcement of what is already required, instead of relying on the aggrieved who have not received what is their right under the ADA or CADA to have to pursue remedies, but to see proactive auditing and reporting of it. We had originally hoped, perhaps a bit optimistically, that 2 longer meetings of each subcommittee could get through all of the ideas. I think the rewrite committee may still get there. The other 2 have another meeting coming up next week. The reality is we're going to have to add another 60-minute meeting for them to get through all of the voting. But all of them, I think, are being thoughtful about the feedback they're getting while still holding the ground on their original charge of removing barriers and ensuring access. I'll open it up to members who have listened. If there's anything Mr. Stone, Rep. Ortiz, or others have heard on individual subcommittees that you'd like to comment on. And then I want to really talk about how we as an exec committee want to use time and perhaps get more targeted input. Mr. Stone, anything from specific committees you want to speak about?
Thank you, Barrick. Michael Stone speaking. Other than what I spoke about before with that sort of moment that came up in the outdoor subcommittee, actually, there is one more thing about enforcement and that question specific to that. And I really don't want that to get lost if we can. I think we owe this member a proper answer, but we owe it to ourselves. But the other one is, there has been some wonderful information that has come from that. So I'm just going to go back to the most recent outdoor subcommittee when one of the directors from the Department of Natural Resources entered, and that was incredible. It gave very, very specific information, and even talked about some of the shortcomings. And that's an area of with respect to a state agency, very willing. They're putting people into jobs. They gave us access to this, and I think that's not something that we should take lightly. I think we should meet them where they're at, and that might be just an area of an opportunity, especially when there's such willingness on that major department's half. And this is obviously access to the outdoors and anything that would come under their controller auspices. And so anyways, that was one observation. And I think that there's been some consistency also in the housing along those lines too. There just seems to be a willingness that of people that we might be able to have very practical conversations with. And I believe that they need to be engaged at that level.
Thank you, Michael. Rep. Ortiz, anything that stood out to you in the subcommittee conversations, either as highlights that was a good example of them standing their ground or responding to feedback, or things that really stood out at you as this is a place where the exec committee is going to need to lean in a bit more?
I've been extremely impressed by the subcommittees for how, my opinion on the feedback, for what they've been given and what they've been able to do with it. So I it's been a joy and motivating to see how the subcommittees have truly come into their own in accomplishing the task of, that piece of legislation that created this task force. So, this is all to praise them. It's really great to see what they're doing with it. They're, in some cases, they stuck to their guns 100%. In other cases, they tweaked it a little bit. And in other cases, they had discussion. Well, this is not what we're going to do here. We're not going to get too much into the nitty gritty. We'll leave that to the executive committee, or maybe they won't want to be specific either. So that gives the Govs team and the legislature some room to work with, right? Like there's some really thoughtful discussions and decisions being made by the subcommittee members. So I've been nothing but impressed by them and what they've been able to do with the feedback.
I appreciate that. Let's go to where you kind of started this, and I think where everybody is, which is the feedback we have gotten. And I think it's what I'm hearing is it is the feedback, which is just, we don't like this. This shouldn't happen in a lot of cases. For more than anything, it's the feedback we didn't get. It's the people who are holding their powder dry for ledge session, or the absence of solutions. And what I'd like to open up to this group is you'll receive the initial recommendations or the final recommendations of each subcommittee on December 2nd. We have until January 30th to deliver a final report. Reality is that means we've got until about January 10th or 12th to tighten up your recommendations themselves, while we then go to the finalization and writing the report and all of your reviews of it. But we've got about 45 days. I don't want this to be the end of stakeholder input or the end of you being able to ask folks things. So there's a number of directions Carrie and I can go for all of you, and I want to get your guidance. We can continue to hold 15 or 20 minutes at the tail end of meetings for public comment. We can do a dedicated listening meeting, 2 or more hours, where we go invite people to come offer their public input, whether that's individuals or businesses or local governments or trade associations, whoever. And you all can listen to it in real time. You can get our notes or you can watch the video. We can also proactively go reach out to some folks with specific questions. I can't guarantee they'll answer, but I have no problem asking anybody any question you'd like, whether that's a state agency, local government, business organization, professional organization, or another. What I'm trying to do is get you all as much input as possible, even when you're not yet getting the input that you would like. So once you've received the recommendations on December 2nd, what can we do to try to gather, provide forums, or extract input, and from whom you would like to hear? Lieutenant Governor.
Well, thanks, Barrick. Well, I'd like to go back to, one of the comments you made about being, respectful and that kind of thing. I know in the COTA rewrite subcommittee, there was some opposition. And even though this person was the lone dissenting vote, They disagreed and discussed and, remained civil and productive. I think the chamber did include some alternative suggestions in their written response, like extending time to file to 1 year rather than 3, as it was recommended. So there might be some room for compromise, on some of the areas where they disagreed. But, I think for people that just had the flat, I don't like it to the, response to the recommendation, then, maybe we should dig deeper and say, what about it didn't you like, and why didn't you like it? And what would you like? It's kind of like back to that old, don't tell me what you can't do, tell me what you can do. What would you like other than the status quo? Because this is an issue that, people with disabilities raised, and we were tasked with coming up with solutions. So what is your solution if not this? I think might be, one of the questions we could pose to people that, had some opposition to some of the recommendations.
I appreciate that. And if I made it appear that there were no productive solutions offered or ideas, that was not my intention. I do think the majority of those, both in support and in opposition, were simply, I like this, do it, or this is bad, don't do it. But Lieutenant Governor is absolutely right. There were some folks that offered, what if instead you X, Y, or Z? One thing I will put on the table, listening to Lieutenant Governor, if anyone would like to go through any of the feedback we received and mark it up, or call Carrie or me and say, these are the questions I have for this person, I am more than happy to reach out to them and ask all of your questions, and to invite them to speak to this group at any time. So use us in that way. Michael, please.
Thank you. Michael Stone speaking. Actually, you just kind of, I have made a question because it was something that you were talking about earlier about how we engage if we were going to have say a 2-hour meeting. And it's also consistent with what the Lieutenant Governor and what you were just saying. Open discussion. A lot of times when we have these situations, there's not a lot of room for that. Like, okay, let me see what it exactly is that you're saying here. And again, using Lieutenant Governor's words, okay, what exactly is it that you don't like? What can we do with it? But I was curious to see if that is going to be an option for us, if we can get down to people who are willing to have an open discussion.
If you all would like, I am more than happy to reach out to everyone who submitted, particularly when it comes to trade associations, professional organizations, or others who represent big groups. I'm more than happy to reach out to anybody you would like and invite them to a small group table discussion where maybe we have the sub or this executive committee, and we have anywhere from 4 to 8 stakeholders or representatives, and engage in a roundtable and hopefully civil, if passionate, and productive conversation. So if you guys would like us to do that, we're happy to facilitate that.
I'd be good with that.
Rep Ortiz, I get a thumbs up. Rep Ortiz, your thoughts on, in addition to that, what is the feedback we didn't get? And do you have ideas on how we can go get it for you so that there are the productive conversations if we can have them, or at least we can exhaust all attempts at them?
Could you be more clear with the question? I'm not sure what you're trying to ask me.
We've received the input that we have.
Mhm.
It's not what some members of the exec committee have found to be as productive as possible. Are there steps you want us to take to go get additional input from stakeholders, whether the same who have getting different input or additional, or from additional stakeholders?
I mean, I have ideas of what might be helpful. I just don't think that they either understood the questions for the feedback. I don't think they know enough about disability rights and the work we're trying to do here to give feedback. And on top of that, they didn't bother to ask any clarifying questions, or maybe they didn't have the opportunity to. So I don't know if it would be helpful to offer to these departments or to some of these trade groups or organizations, some of members of the advocates and maybe some like some lawyers to be able to speak to them on this and kind of be able to clarify the ideas, because there were some that didn't understand the ideas, like you cited, around making sure things are accessible when it comes to what candidates have to be involved in. So just someone that's there to be able to represent this task force, to be able to answer questions that we can answer, but also allow them resources, kind of like a working group, to be able to workshop this. I mean, like, I've got ideas that the business community can do that would be helpful for them. Why haven't, and like that the disabled community can do, why haven't we started a disabled chamber of commerce? And why, in collecting those dues, don't we, as this chamber of commerce, have letters of agreement with some of these other chambers of commerce where we can get membership with them at a reduced rate too, but we also house an expert, that's someone that's certified, that can advise them on how to be more accessible in their workplace and to their clients and customers. That way, each individual place of business doesn't have to do that. The disabled chamber of commerce can do that, right? Like, if people took a second to reflect on what has worked for them in their arena, because obviously they have regular chambers of commerce and it's worked for them, they have them for a reason. Why haven't they offered that idea? Right? Like, instead of saying this isn't going to work and we don't want to do this. So maybe offering them work groups and resources that they can pick the brains of. And then, because again, like, you exist for a reason. Like, I'm not trying to write someone off or dismiss someone either. Like, Kirsten has experience that she can offer. She just doesn't have an idea of the puzzle yet. Like, she has expertise in her arena. If we help show more of the puzzle, maybe she can help us put it together, right? And I'm not picking on anybody. I'm just using an example here. So, maybe working groups, and I know we're running out of time, so I don't know how feasible that is. I don't know how much time people want to spend on that, right? But so I don't know if that helps to begin to answer your question or not, Barrett, but.
It absolutely does. And I appreciate it. And I think, we offered opportunities that could have been seized on to have some collaborative dialogue. It didn't happen. I am absolutely prepared, and I think it makes sense and would be beneficial if we can still do that. So,
well, that should be a part of the report then, because again, like, my biggest thing is that I want the truth. I want transparency, and I don't want to call it ammunition, but I want facts to be able to be displayed. We gave you an opportunity to offer these experts and this network that this task force developed, and you chose not to take advantage of it. Just be very frank about that. I want to cite something too, that because the CDLE had an event at Brewability with this grassroots trade association, I guess you could call them. And the Voc rehab specialist was there talking about tax incentives that we give for people that hire disabled folks. Oh man, I think I just threw it away, but I was doing the math. So, like, if 9 million people on average with disabilities get employed across the country, the lowest amount incentive that we give is $1,200. The highest is $9,800. Folks, that works out to be 30 million at the lowest to $149 million. And the idea is that money should be spent on creating more access, not just to pad your bottom line and to incentivize hiring these folks, right? So there's just a lot of information that we need to amalgamate, help gather, and help push out there to make sure that we're solving these problems, right? Like the bottom, like Mike was so on point where, like, I have a hard word with the word aspiration, because civil rights should not be aspirational. That is the floor. You know what I mean? That is the floor. And to be told that, hoping for your full civil rights is aspirational is, man, it's something else. Anyways, I'll leave it there.
I appreciate it. And I will own the use of that word and do some thinking about how I can phrase things better, because I hope it was never meant to be a minimum thing. What I will do is Carrie and I will sit down and we'll talk with the DORA team, and we will look at what we can do. I think for our first December meeting, we're going to look at all of the recommendations you get. I think some of them you're going to be able as a group to come together on a consensus pretty quickly that let's move this or let's don't. I think there's gonna be a number of them where you would really benefit from some of this collaborative dialogue. So I think what we'll try to do is put between the first and the second exec committee meetings in December, a couple of things. One, a listening session where Carrie and I will just invite people to provide comment. You all can listen in live or after the fact or read our notes. But we'll also sit down and see if we can't put together what I think are two different groups you all are talking about. One for a collaborative conversation with the business community and their representatives, one with government representatives. I obviously can't force anybody to come, but I will set the table, and I will set a big table, and I will chase everybody with invitations. And I will work with all of you on the kind of conversations that we want to have. Lieutenant Governor or Kirsten, any other thoughts on how to effectively engage stakeholders in productive conversation rather than just Google Forms or letters sent back and forth?
I was gonna let Kirsten go first.
I think she just came off mute. So we may have
Yeah,
her.
I think it would probably be a good idea to probably, I think hosting a forum would be I mean, and you know, I don't know if it's just the way that you kind of mentioned, but just making sure that you had enough different groups that are there. And getting that kind of feedback, whether it's even you know, some more local governments. I mean, one of the concerns I had in particular was the requirement for an ADA coordinator for each local government. The only reason why I say that, I personally have spent a lot of time in Northern Colorado years ago. I've done a lot of work in Northern Colorado, and there's a lot of really small communities that just don't have any resources. I mean, they don't even have a town planner. Their planner is hired, you know, all done privately. They, you know, they maybe have a town manager, and, you know, a lot of times they don't even have, you know, they don't have their own water and sanitation district. That's a separate organization. I mean, they're not it's not exactly what we think of when we think of, say, you know, Westminster or somewhere else. And so that just is one of the things that I look at is, if we're going to be successful in getting support for all of the recommendations that are there, I think being really thoughtful about, you know, making sure, you know, maybe in that scenario, the alternative is it maybe it's just that it's at the county level as opposed to each local government, because that can just be really difficult for some of those smaller governments. But I don't know. Well, I really just talked in circles, but I don't know. I think some kind of forum where we could just put out feelers and invitations to all of the different types of groups that we're affecting here, which is, you know, in the government subcommittee stuff, some of these local governments, I think, would be really important to have at the table, and I think their feedback would be really helpful.
I think those are all good points. And so, you know, the subcommittee did have a pretty in-depth conversation about that requirement and landed on aligning it with the federal requirement, which breaks it down based on the number of employees in the government. And I'll have to go back and look at the notes, Kirsten, but I believe they start their requirements at 50 employees or more. And that's where the subcommittee started going with their discussion of based on that federal scale and table, and transitioning it in at county seats and then into municipal. But I appreciate the thoughts on how to do a forum, and I may follow up with you to see if you've got additional ideas on how to structure it and how to get some folks to attend. Lieutenant Governor, your thoughts on how to get the kind of feedback that we're hearing your colleagues on this exec council want to get, or the conversations?
You know, I think one of the saddest things for me, after having worked in some branch of government for 4 decades or better, is that people who aren't involved in the government don't really understand the benefit that the government provides. I actually just spoke to a 2nd grade class this morning about, you know, why government's important, and what all the kinds of functions government performs that impact their daily lives, like, you know, the water they drink out of their drinking fountains and their roads that their parents drive on, and on and on and on. But I wish we could do some sort of media request, like a public service announcement or something, asking for people to attend this forum, or if one of the stations would pick it up, or something, because, I think those of us that have been in this have cast as wide a net as we know. It's a lot of the same players. And I always heard, if you want to find out why somebody's not eating at your restaurant, don't ask the people that are eating there. Ask the people that aren't eating there, why they're not eating at your restaurant, or about your restaurant. So I wish somehow with the PSA or something, we could cast a wider net than just the people that we know that are, the choir that we preach to all the time.
Appreciate that. And I will go back. So, we had one conversation as a full Confluence and Dora team. And after some soft outreach, the sense we got back from the media was you really don't have a story of public interest just yet. And whether that's them or us, that's just what we got. But I'm happy to go have another round of conversations, and any platform folks will give us to have this conversation, I will be there to facilitate it. So we'll brainstorm a bit on that. With that said, although we are 25 minutes still to go in a meeting with only half of our exec council here today, I'm not going to force everybody to stay on the line. I do want to go around and just give everyone of the exec committee members an opportunity to offer final thoughts or words of guidance or requests for Carrie and me as we go into this next round of subcommittee meetings, and as we consider ways to do this additional outreach. And Michael, I'll start with you, and then I'll go to the Lieutenant Governor, then to Kirsten, and then to Rep. Ortiz. How can we best serve you as these subcommittees meet and you get ready to take their ideas on December 2nd and turn them into brilliant action by the state?
Michael Stone speaking. It's don't have a great answer for that. One thing I want to say to you though is to not to sorry, apologize for the aspirational comment that was not directed in any way, shape at you. That was provided in guidance and for people to think big. And one of the challenges I think that, and I've seen this as a pattern in some of the subcommittees, is the pattern of negotiating with ourselves, basically, trying to come up with solutions. Well, if we say this, well, they're going to say that, and if we do, and you can make yourself crazy going down the list. So having using aspirational as guidance was absolutely the right thing to do. There's a little bit of a cause and effect when things are taken very literally. No, I really like the direction that we're going in with this. To answer your question, although I have to say, Rep. Ortiz's idea of having a disabled Chamber of Commerce, I'm just really upset with myself for never thinking about that. I think that's absolutely brilliant, and definitely requires more conversation on that. But yeah, I'm going to have to give your question a little bit more thought. If that's okay.
No, absolutely. And you and I owe each other a phone call anyway, so we can follow up on that. Kirsten, in addition to what we've talked about or adding color and detail to it, what can our team do to best prepare you with the most information and perspectives to start casting some votes and advocating within the exec committee come December?
Actually, what would be great is that can you put I think there's too many emails going around and it's almost hard to follow exactly then what's the current recommendation and everything else. I think more kind of summaries on the exact pieces of where we're at, along with those little one-pagers, I think would be really helpful for me so that I can get myself more up to speed faster.
Understood. And I will readily admit that if you saw my desk with 80 Post-its, 16 tabs open, and 4 different windows, I'm not the one for that. But fortunately, I was smart enough to have a colleague who is far more organized. So I will work with Carrie, and we will get you a single directory of the ideas and where they stand right now. Lieutenant Governor, final only for today, because you know my door is always open. Any last thoughts on how we can best support you and the members of this executive committee with getting as diverse of input and candid of input in conversations as possible?
So, one thing, when I was in the legislature and I would read my bills before committee and, the lobbyists would always come up to me and say, well, how are you going to vote? And I would always say, I'm not going to tell you, because I was not the favorite of the lobbyists. I'm not going to tell you until I hear how these black words on this white piece of paper impact human beings. That's when I'll tell you how I'm going to vote, And so, when I read a lot of the subcommittee recommendations, especially the CADA, I'm not a lawyer. I've not seen lots of cases. I don't understand exactly what this does or doesn't mean. So for me, what would really help is give me some human examples. If we do this, then how does that help people? If we don't do this, then what do people stand to lose? And give some real life examples. I think Josh, and I think maybe in the CADA subcommittee, there was some things like, well, if you, because of some sort of barrier, or like architectural barrier or something that was put in place, you couldn't make it to your only son's graduation or wedding or something like that. How does that compare to, another example, XYZ? So I think having some real world examples of what this means to people with disabilities and what it doesn't mean, or whatever, what kind of things aren't they going to be able to participate in society if we don't do some of this, and what haven't they been able to participate in like the last more than 34 years, would really, really help me. And I don't vote unless I have to break a tie of some sort. So, I'm not the most important voice on the committee, but that would help me really understand, what we're trying to do. And then, Rep. Ortiz, I loved his idea again about the chamber, just like Michael Stone did. I know Danny Combs did form a chamber for people who are neurodiverse. So there is an example out there, but I'm sure they have a different mission than, a chamber for people with disabilities would be. So maybe that's something that Rep. Ortiz can do when he's got his feet, just kicked up and not in the legislature anymore. So anyway, but I think real life examples for me of how this impacts people, it makes a huge difference.
I appreciate that. And we had an opportunity just a week ago to connect with the Colorado Neurodiversity Chamber of Commerce. And it didn't even occur to me, Rep. Ortiz, at the time that there wasn't a disability chamber of commerce and the opportunities there. I think we can move forward with everything that you're laying out, Lieutenant Governor Primavera. I will say it was a challenge we had in putting these ideas forward of how do we keep them factual when there is a real human element and reality behind them. And I think it is undeniable that people looked at these more dryly and it was dehumanized. We chose not to, for example, in CADA, go down the list of reasons somebody might sue out of concern of we might miss some other reasons or get into legal interpretations. But maybe part of what we need to do is highlight some of these stories. And if we do these forums, start with the human story of this is what it is like for an individual who has been through this. And let that be the basis of the conversation, not the law and the dollars. With that, Rep. Ortiz, your thoughts on these ideas for forums, for roundtables, and for how we exhaust all possible opportunities for people to be a productive partner in this.
Yeah, I mean, I think letting the subcommittees continue on their work, like I said, they've done some amazing things with very little. All right, they've been doing their work, so I'm very proud and impressed by them. As far as like how we get people to come to the table, I believe in carrots and sticks. Like the carrot is we will help give you the tools in this work committee so you can offer solutions. The stick is if you don't, then part of our report will be naming you out by name that we offered you these resources and you did nothing with it. I mean, I'm sure there's a more diplomatic way to put that, but I am not in a very diplomatic mood right now, right? Like they're like showing that there's going to be some transparency and accountability. Like I'm not trying to throw people under the bus. It's just listing the facts as they are so that when we try to do work in the legislature or with the govs team, and then all of a sudden you have all these stakeholders coming out of the woodwork saying the same old things and being like, well, we didn't have the opportunity to do ABC, and be like, well, according to this page on the task force report, you were given all of these opportunities and you didn't avail yourselves of them. So we're going to move forward with their solution. So I don't know what else to say other than that, using the carrot and stick approach again, and then being very transparent and stating that there will be some accountability on the back end for those that choose not to avail themselves of the money that the state put forward in this task force, and the time that these other amazing humans that are on the executive committee with me and the amazing humans that are in the subcommittee have put into it, all while getting paid big bucks, right? Like we're all getting paid good money, right? Sarcasm. We're not getting paid anything. This is volunteer completely, right? But like, I don't know what to do other than that. So.
Understood. So here's what we're going to do. One, Carrie and I will assemble, and when I say Carrie and I, Carrie will assemble because she's far more organized than me, a simple directory of where all of the ideas are, including the ones with my markup that reflect the current meetings. We will also include for all of you, again, the dates and times of the subcommittee meetings. They are off this week. They resume next week. We would love to have you listen in on any of those so you can track in real time. I will also spend time, Carrie and I will, with Ginny and Aubrey and Katie at Dora to look at what we can do to put these listening sessions or forums together. And as we put those together, we will work with all of you on some outreach for that. Just as a reminder on timelines, as I said, subcommittees will meet next week. Reality is I'm probably going to ask that at least 3 of them for some additional 1-hour meetings prior to Thanksgiving. On December 2nd, which is a Monday, you will receive the subcommittee reports from all 4 subcommittees. The next executive committee meeting is December 10th. What I will ask of all of you is to have thoroughly read, made notes on each of those subcommittee reports and all of the public input connected to them, so that our first meeting, we can quickly go through and see if there are ideas that you're able to move on quickly and identify the ones where we know we're going to want to really dig into either discussion as an exec committee or discussion as an exec committee and at some of these roundtables we'll put together. The next scheduled meeting after that December 10th, 11 a.m. meeting is December 18th. What I'm going to try to do is put together these forums or roundtables in between those 2 meetings. I know that's a tight timetable, but I'm trying to make sure I don't ask more of your time directly over the holidays, whichever holidays you may celebrate at the end of December. So December 2nd, you'll receive the reports. December 10th, 8 days later, I'm going to ask you to come together ready to work through what we can. In between all of that, I'm going to be talking with you about folks to invite to some roundtable forums. So hopefully we can have some productive conversations. And then we'll keep plowing right through this through December. Other than that, I think you all have Carrie's in my email, our cell phones. Call us, text us, email us. Know we are available to you to help make sure we get this right for you. But Lieutenant Governor and Rep. Ortiz, I'll let you close us out.
I think we should save the best for last, Lieutenant Governor. I think you should have the final word. Yeah, I just want to thank Carrie and Barrick for how far we've come with this task force from the beginning. So I appreciate you guys. I just want to thank Mike for clarifying, when it comes to aspirational, I understood your intent just like Mike did, and it was to help the subcommittees move forward and not get hung up on negotiating ourselves down. That message is more for everyone else that hears that and then interprets it in their own way. So just kudos to you and Carrie. Thank you so much for how far you've taken us in this journey. Lieutenant Governor, what can I say? You've been a champion for us since before I was injured and came to this community. Thank you so much for lending your office's work and legitimacy to this task force. I don't think we would be where we are without that. So, and then for everyone else that has given up their time and talents and taken this seriously, thank you. I'm going to keep saying, you're going to get tired of hearing me say thank you, but thank you so much. And on a side note, everybody get out there and vote. I don't care who you vote for, just get out there and vote.
Well, I have to admit, Rep. Ortiz, I do care who they vote for, but anyway, I won't say who that is. I won't do that. But, you know, I learned when I was at the John F. Kennedy School of Government program that I went to for, I think, about 6 weeks. And they said that government is intended to move slow, so that if you do elect the wrong people, they can't get in there and make, you know, horrendous changes just like overnight. But I think in the case of the ADA, it's moved a little, not a little too slow, but a lot too slow, and we have so much work to do. So, you know, I know we're supposed to have the recommendations together in December. I know there'll be some work done in the legislative session, but I'd like to see this work continue, just like, you know, I was worried about the fact that disability policy would be lost once the governor and I left office in 2 years. And so that's why we created the Colorado Disability Opportunity Office, so that it wouldn't get lost. So I know we won't be able to change and accomplish everything this next legislative session. We'll probably, I hope, be able to do a lot, but I wish this task force or task force similar to this one would continue to make sure that the work on behalf of people with disabilities continues into the next administration. So that's one of my final thoughts. And Rep. Ortiz, I hate to lose you. I don't care how you've been described, you know. We need that voice in the legislature. So I don't think anybody can carry it as well as you have, but I hope we have somebody in this next round of electees and that have a passion for disability issues. So that's all I have to say today.
With that, thank you all. We will follow by email with all of those things that are on us to do. If I don't speak with you before then, have a fantastic end of November, Thanksgiving, if you're celebrating it, and we will see you in early December. Reach out if we can do anything in the meantime. Thank you all very much.